Hello everyone, my name is Joy. I hope you've all been keeping well. Today, I'm here to encourage you and also to tell you that God is bigger. One of the common and interesting Bible story is that of David and Goliath. This is a story that depicts a real life event of what truly happened. David's father, Jesse, sent him on an errand. David's brother had gone to war, and Jesse wanted David to take some food to them. When he arrived at the camp of the Israelites, David heard the voice of an oversized man down in the valley of Elah, bellowing for someone to come and fight him. That was Goliath. Goliath was 9 feet, 6 inches of solid muscle. Certainly, no one was willing to go and fight him. That is until David showed up, of course. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" What's interesting about this story is that Goliath wasn't simply hanging around in the valley shouting at the Israelites. No, instead, he was coming up to their camp and taunting them there. And that's how giants are. When you give them an inch, they will take a mile. You might be facing some kind of giant in your life, such as a giant problem, a giant challenge, or a giant addiction. And as the days go by, your giant seems to get bigger and bigger, taunting you relentlessly. It could be a giant of fear. I mean, it's easy to watch or read the news about what's going on around us or in the world generally and become paralyzed with fear. You might be facing a giant of personal sin, a certain area of your life where you are falling repeatedly. You can't seem to get victory. You see, a giant is anyone or anything that seeks to control you, hurt you, destroy you, or torment you in life. We may be able to recite God's promises by the dozens, but if in our hearts God is no longer the king who conquers armies and cuts a valley in the sea, or he is no longer the shepherd who seeks his sheep and keeps them safe behind his staff, or he is no longer the Lord who walks on waves and calls the dead from the grave, slowly, subtly, we have forgotten God's power, God's wisdom, God's tenderness. Or when the promises of God seem powerless to quiet our fears, soothe our grief, lift our worries, or motivate our obedience, or when God has become small in our eyes, your giant takes delight in these things. And the promises of God loses power in our lives. See, we need to be consistent, regardless of what is going on around us, regardless the distraction, regardless of what poses as fear around us. We need to do more than simply hearing his promises again and again. We need to behold God in knowledge and in truth without wavering. In the midst of unsteady and unfavorable situations, we must always remember that God, who gives us his promises, is a God of might, who created the world by his word. He is the God of wisdom, who makes a way in the wilderness. He is the God of tenderness, who carries his children home. And he is bigger than all of our giants or little problems. And that's the good news, that God is bigger than your giants. The key is understanding and seeing God as you ought to. Then you will see your problems for what they are. God is bigger than what you're facing. Lazarus' story comes to mind. He got sick. Mary and Martha, his sisters, sent word to Jesus so he could come and heal Lazarus. They waited and waited, but Lazarus got sicker and sicker, and then he died. Worse yet, there was no sign of Jesus. Not only did he miss healing his close friend, but he missed the funeral too. So in their estimation, Jesus has failed. Jesus was late. You can imagine a question like, if Jesus really loved Lazarus, why didn't he immediately go and heal him? You see, Mary and Martha were looking at the small picture, but Jesus was looking at the big picture. They were looking at the temporal, but Jesus was looking at the eternal. They were looking at the physical, but Jesus was looking at the supernatural. They wanted healing, but Jesus wanted a resurrection. In the same way, when giants like hardship, tragedy, or even death comes into our lives, we might ask, if God really loved me, why did he let this happen? See, Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 11 says, "Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time." God's delay is not necessarily his denials. A no today might turn into a yes tomorrow. You may currently be facing some problems or trials of faith. You may have been praying and it seems God doesn't answer your prayer in the way you want him to. First of all, you must remember that God is able to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. You may not get sudden answers to prayers, probably because he has something bigger in store for you than what you could have dreamed. And that's why it's always a good idea to include in your prayers that, Father, not my will, but yours be done. I pray that the peace and the loving arms of our Father be always with you in whatever you may be facing at this moment in time, whatever may feel as a giant that refuses to go. God will give you victory in the name of Jesus. So until I come to your screen next time, please stay in his presence and do have a victorious week. Thank you.